Welcome, everybody, to the Jimmy Tingle Show. I am Jimmy, and I am so excited to have our guest today because over 25 years in comedy, my guest today, Gary Gulman, Boston's own, has established himself as an eminent performer and peerless writer, and I can attest to that personally. I've seen him in action. It is no wonder the New York Times wrote Gary is finally being recognized as one of the country's strongest comedians. He has made countless television appearances both as a comedian, as an actor, and is one of only a handful of comedians to perform, get this, on every single late-night comedy program. Letterman, The Tonight Show, Fallon, Conan, what was the other one?
Seth Meyers.
Seth Meyers, Jimmy Kimmel, and today, Tingle. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. He has completed the circle with the Tingle Show. He's made 4 masterful television specials, including his most recent universally acclaimed stand-up special for HBO, The Great Depresh. This is an awesome show, ladies and gentlemen. A tour de force look at mental illness, which is equal parts hilarious and inspiring. And again, I've seen that, and I agree, hilarious and inspiring. And in 2019, he appeared in the international blockbuster Joker. He will next be co-starring with Amy Schumer, lovely Amy Schumer, in an upcoming Hulu comedy series, Life and Beth, and is currently writing a memoir, brothers and sisters, for Flatiron Books, tentatively titled K through 12. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to show you this clip from the HBO special, The Great Depresh, and then I want to welcome our friend Gary Gulman to the show. Please roll this clip from HBO's The Great Depresh.
I have no idea how this is going to go. I mean, is it possible that this subject isn't even funny?
It was a long time since I shot my last special. I got very sick with the Depresh. I grew up in the 70s, and the only antidepressants we had access to was Snap Out of It and What Have You Got to Be Depressed About? That was the second leading brand of antidepressant.
A happier kid you couldn't find. Always had a smile on his face. So how could I detect anything?
This is a book I wrote in 2nd grade. It was called The Lonely Tree, and to anybody with a small amount of psychology knowledge, you would know this was a cry for help.
But I know my depression is in remission.
And I'm only comfortable talking about it now because I have come out the other side.
I wanna be your rock.
Therapy saved my life. I believe I broke my therapist. I was leaving his office and I was shutting the door and I heard him go.
Some days you'll feel great.
It's interesting because millennials take so much flack from middle-aged men talking about participation trophies. Their argument is, how are they gonna learn how to lose? How are they gonna learn how to lose? Oh, they'll get some practice. Are you familiar at all with life?
Take it as it goes. Take it as it goes.
Please welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, Boston's own, my friend, soon to be yours, Gary Gulman. Hey, Gary.
Hi, Jimmy. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
I hadn't seen that clip in a while. I'm welling up a little because that song is actually, it was written and performed by a friend of mine, somebody I met during the process of writing and touring that, this guy named Andy Frasco, and he struggles with some mood disorders, and he wrote that, and it's a song sort of to himself. And it resonated with myself and the director and somebody I put together the special with, and it really hits me. So thanks for putting that on here.
Of course, Gary. Well, it's a wonderful song, and the special is phenomenal. And I have to tell you, seeing your mother in the special, first of all, I'm a huge fan, a friend, but a huge fan. And my wife and I went to the show when you were working this out. Before you filmed The Great Depresh, we saw it live at the Wilbur Theater. And after the show, we were all out on the sidewalk, and there was about, I'd say 10 or 15 comics there that had just come on their own, individually. And we were all out on the sidewalk conversing about how great the show was. And who walks out but your mother? And we all surround her, and we're telling her how wonderful it is. And she was telling us how wonderful it was. She loved it. She couldn't believe it. She was so happy and so proud. And we were all around her, and it was just great to see her there, meeting her in person, and then seeing her in the film is fantastic. But it was it was a wonderful moment to see all the comics come out and to see your mom there. And I know you had family members, etc. So that was a really, really special moment. But I have to ask you, Gary, the process of taking a subject like that, of depression, and going to the next level, not only coming out publicly about it, but to process that through comedy for people. When you were doing that, like in the first clip of the first scene in that clip, you're saying, I don't even know if this is going to be funny. What was going through your mind?
Yeah, I mean, specifically what I was talking about at that point in the process, I had been talking about my depression for a long time. Mm-hmm. That night, I was going out to talk about, for the first time, having had electroconvulsive therapy. Mm. So we were going to get me talking about electroconvulsive therapy on camera for the first time. And that I was concerned with, because I was convinced people are going to be like, oh no. This is really scary, and we're embarrassed for him, and please don't talk about this. And in reality, they weren't upset by it. It didn't bum them out. And as long as it was funny, they were fine with it. And it was kind of funny the first night. And then I figured out different ways. And I mean, I learned from watching you and the other guys over the years. I mean, that's the great thing about coming up in Boston, is you would see guys who had been doing it a while keep doing it and improving and doing well, but also doing things that didn't work, and not lashing out at the crowd, or not. I mean, here's a good thing is, sometimes you do a joke and it doesn't work, and it's not me, it's the crowd. That's important. And then sometimes you have to know, oh, it's the joke, it's not good enough, I need to change it. So you need to learn. You need to learn that. So it's very difficult, but also you were always there to answer questions such as, how do I know when to just give up on a joke or to keep doing it? And I mean, the guys were just so generous. You and Brian Kiley and Barry Crimmins, and we're just so generous, and we're all standing on the shoulders of giants, because as much as we love to get laughs from the audience, but what you really want is to be appreciated by the people that you appreciate, the other comedians.
I agree, Gary, and thank you so much for the kind words. And I have to tell you, the Boston scene, you're right, it makes you better, because there are a lot of good people who are pretty generous with their feedback, but also you have to go after them on stage. So you have to, your game has to be brought up a few notches if you're going to follow these folks. And so you do learn. It's like basketball. I know you play a lot of basketball. When you play with good people, you get better. You know, and that's how the scene here in Boston was. And in terms of the jokes, when do you know? It's so hard to determine, oh, geez, that joke didn't work. Maybe it's them. And then after like 10 times, maybe it's me. Maybe it is the joke. I'm 0 for 10. I've been up at the plate 10 times with this joke. I got to change something. Maybe the premise isn't quite right. Right. But I have to tell you, one of the things that I love about what you do and the way you do it is, you would come into the comedy studio, and I appreciate this. You're in your 50s, I'm in my 60s, and I am easily 2 to 3 times older than everybody in the audience at these young clubs. And you would come in as a veteran comic, and we'd be constantly trying new things, constantly working out material. And all of that material in the Great Depresh, a lot of it, I saw you worked out at the Comedy Studio. So one of the things that I love about you, not only the intelligence and the creativity, but is the work ethic. And where do you get that, Gary? I mean, are you using like your sports training to just get better at comedy and going out there every night and practicing?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, it was sports, and I'm sure there are a number of other areas where if you have a child, you can instill this in them. But I found with sports, the great thing that sports teaches you is that if you go out every day and you put in some effort, you will notice improvement. I look back on fondly now because it's interesting was that I had moved back in to my mom's house because I'd been hospitalized in the psychiatric ward. I didn't think I was going to be able to continue in comedy. I was concerned about paying rent and things like that. So I wanted to sort of reset my life. So I moved back into my mom's house in Peabody, Massachusetts, where I grew up. I was sleeping in the same bed that I slept in high school, and it sounds nuts to me now, but at the time it seemed like a reasonable move. But I put next to my bed a quote from the playwright and author Samuel Beckett, and it said, ever tried, ever failed, try again, fail better. And that relieved me of all the pain of a joke that doesn't work, which used to cripple me. I would bomb on stage and I wouldn't be able to get out of bed the next day. And then it became, no, bombing on stage is how you're going to get better. You're gonna miss 1,000 shots, but the next day you'll miss 999 shots. And the next day 900 shots, and you'll get better. So my trying out new jokes and new approaches. So if I get one sentence that works, the next day, maybe I'll get 2 sentences.
Well, it really shows, Gary, and it has worked for you. And I know the feeling when you're talking about you just want to get on stage, because stage time is crucial. You can write all you want in your room and the notebook or whatever, but the test is, how is this going to be received by 100 strangers or 500 strangers? And that's the whole thing. I was on with Colin Quinn a couple of weeks ago. He said the same thing. He goes, I hate bombing. I hate getting up there and trying stuff and it doesn't work. There's no feeling as bad. It's like being at the dinner table. For those of you who are not comics or watching this, it's like being at the dinner table or in front of like maybe your company outing, and you're trying to be, and you say something you think is hilarious, and everybody else looks at you like, wow, that was really out of place. I can't believe. Did you hear what he just said? You cringe and you retreat into yourself. Yeah. But anyway, that's what you got to do. And it's like lifting weights or doing push-ups or running laps or whatever it is. You got to keep doing it to improve. Another one of the things that I love about you is not only the work ethic, but you're very generous with sharing what you've learned. And you were doing something called Tips on Twitter. Tell me about Tips on Twitter. And you did like hundreds of them, right?
Yeah, I did. I think 366. And
wow.
It started on like December 30th, I think 2018 or 19. Yeah, I drank a lot of coffee and I get very ambitious. And I said to my wife, what do you think that people would say if I offered a tip a day about comedy? And she said they would love it. And so I said, okay, for the next year, I'm going to give a tip every day. I mean, the thing is that I thought people would say, well, who the hell are you to offer this? But then people really embraced it. I was really pleased by that because I'm insecure about those things. So that was really nice. But really I was feeling very good. I had been recovering gradually from my very deep depression. And so I wanted a way to show gratitude and give back for the immense amount of help and guidance I had been given by people like you and Paul D'Angelo and Don Gavin, Steve Sweeney, and Kenny Rogerson, and Lenny Clark, and Tony V, and Barry Crimmins, and Bobcat. I mean, so many Boston guys when I was coming up, and with the Great Depresh, Judd Apatow reached his hand out and helped me up. So I mean, none of us do it by ourselves. We all have so much help. I mean, the guy who tells you he did it by myself is just either a liar or a very selfish narcissist. I mean, that's you can't do it by yourself.
What did you call them? What was the official name of them?
I called them Gulman's tips, which
Gulman's tips, right?
Yeah,
Gulman's tips. But I have to tell you, Gary, I can't tell you how many people saw that, other comics, and go, aren't these awesome? And the great thing about those tips were that you could apply it not only to comedy, but you could apply it almost to anything. It's like, write more. That was like your big thing. Every tip you would say, write more. And it encouraged me to write more and encouraged a lot of people to write more. And it was always really just very insightful and just helpful.
Yeah, I think that the other thing with teaching is that a lot of times you're also reinforcing your own lessons, the things you need to know. Yeah. So it also got me to do the things that I had sometimes not lost track of that I like. For instance, one of my favorite ones is be the comedian you would want to see.
Yeah.
And it goes to, I mean, everything I'm looking at in your set is a reflection of what kind of comedy you enjoy, which is a person who takes it seriously, a person who puts on a show, and a person who is professional and is straightforward. And who do I compare this to? And I say, oh, I don't know anybody like this. And that was the great thing about Boston comedy. When I was coming up, you would see everyone had their own style. And then you would see the different comedians you would say, this is somebody who's a disciple of Jimmy Tingle. This is a disciple of Gavin. This is a disciple of Lenny. This is a disciple of Crimmins. And it was so interesting.
Yeah, Gary, it's so interesting that you say that, because when I was coming up, and back in the day when we all first started, a year was like a long time to be ahead of somebody. If you yes. Like, for example, I started in 1980, but Barry Crimmins probably started maybe 77, maybe 78 in upstate New York. Lenny started, I think, 78, 79. Anyway, they had a couple of years on me. So like your point about Gavin and Sweeney and all these guys, I was the daytime bartender at the Ding Ho. So right. I didn't study comedy or go to school for it. These were like the teachers. So inadvertently, my first year, they go, whoa, geez, that sounds too much like Gavin. That's like Crimmins. That's like Clark. So you don't want to copy them, but you are influenced by them, and you eventually find your own voice. Yes. That was my experience as the bartender at the Ding Ho when all those guys were coming up. And Stephen Wright's another one, of course, and Paula Poundstone. Just fabulous.
Yeah.
Fabulous comics. Mike McDonald, Mike Donovan, all these guys, they were just wonderful. Gary, I want to know about your writing process, because I know you're working on a new show now and you're touring that. First of all, Carnegie Hall, you sold out Carnegie Hall. How was that?
It was perfect in every way. It's interesting because, from going on TV shows that you get to the building and you think, well, everything's much smaller than I had pictured. Yeah. And it's a lot older, and they haven't really kept up with maintenance. But everything about Carnegie Hall is like it's been either polished or refurbished in the last 48 hours. It was incredible. I mean, it felt like I was the first person to ever set foot in my dressing room. It was extraordinary, and I walked out there. I had the chills. And the audience was so appreciative, and I just had the most extraordinary time. And with regards to my process, I try not to spend the day listening to music or podcasts or books or anything in my ears. I try to sort of ruminate over the jokes I'm working on and think, and then I'll write things down. The other thing is that I spend a lot of time transcribing shows, and while I'm transcribing them, I'll pause and think, oh, I think a better word here is a synonym for this rather than this particular word. My favorite Mark Twain quote is the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and the lightning bug. So you know how just one word can make the entire difference in the joke. So I'll say, no, the best word right here. So I'll change that and then try it out that night. I mean, that's the beautiful part of living in New York City, is that I can go on at least once each night and try out a new joke. And then over 6 months, 9 months, I'm on the road and tweaking and adding things. And this came from living in Los Angeles, where I would only get 2 shows a week. I didn't want to take a chance of trying out a new joke and having it bomb. Yeah. So I would add something new to an old joke that worked. And then if it bombed, it was just a sentence. And so I would just make really long jokes. So that was my process. And then my process became my style. So I have these very long jokes. So people will think of me as the guy who tells really long jokes, but that just became a thing where I didn't want to look bad for too long.
Yeah, man, it's tough. Why, Gary, why could you only get on a couple of times a week in LA compared to New York?
There were too few clubs and too many celebrities. The good thing was that I enrolled in an acting program, so I would take acting classes 4 nights a week, and that was very helpful. It kept me sane, and it gave me a social life, because the actors I was involved with, they would go out to eat after the classes, and so I had friends, and that was helpful. But otherwise, I would have lost my mind.
Right. I always found the LA audiences tough. I mean, the New York audiences, they're centered. They're in New York. They know who they are. They know where they live. They know where they came from. They're in the mix. They're in the mix of, like, they're walking everywhere. Not everybody's in a car. They're on the train. There's a communal feeling in New York. LA, it's just a different vibe. And I always felt it was just hard to get that warmth from them. That was my experience anyway.
No, definitely. Jimmy.
So when you're working out in New York, where do you go?
I go to Comedy Cellar, Gotham Comedy Club. That's just really nice club in the Upper West Side called the West Side Comedy Club. And then there are a few places in Brooklyn that I go to. I go to Union Hall. I go to this place called Littlefield, and then this other place called the Bell House. Mm-hmm. And Brooklyn is really terrific. I mean, every place you go now has some sort of vibe attached to it, but I never find that's the case. Like these are only hipsters and they only laugh at jokes that are this, but that's not really the case. Yes, you can't be. I find that you can't be racist and sexist anywhere, but that's not a bad thing.
No, that's a good thing. The culture's evolving.
Yeah.
The culture's evolving. You're absolutely right. And you know what's cool? One of the clubs here in Boston, we both are big fans of the Comedy Studio.
Yeah.
I work out there all the time. I go up to Giggles, Mike Clark and Lenny Clark's room up there on Route 1. And I go to the open mics, and I love it because, like I said earlier, I'm by far usually the oldest comic on the bill, and like I said, sometimes twice as old as the audience. But if you can make these people in their 20s laugh, it's like you said, they're not judgmental about age or anything. Just be funny. Just go out and make them laugh. And, and most people are very open to whatever you got to say. Just, just do the job.
Yeah, I think that Carlin was able to reach young people, college people at every point in his career into his 70s, because he kept an open mind and he kept going to the clubs, and he never became obsolete, and he didn't do that kids these days humor. And I
Right.
think that's the difference, because the kids these days humor is not new. Every generation has whined about the kids these days, and it's a nail in your coffin.
Yeah, it's a little cranky.
Yes.
It's a little cranky. There's a famous quote from Socrates who said, I fear to leave, I'm paraphrasing, I fear to leave the future in the hands of the youth of today. This is Socrates, whatever that was. That was like, I don't know, 1000 BC or something,
Yes.
Whatever it was.
Yeah.
So Socrates, a little cranky, a little cranky. Be like Plato, be more forward thinking, or Aristotle.
Yeah. Yeah.
The kids are all right. But tell me about the new show, Gary. This is great. I saw excerpts of it.
The show I'm working on now is basically about the unprecedented income inequality in our country as it relates to my upbringing when there were, I mean, insanely rich people, but the disparity wasn't as poisonous. I've also always been fascinated by class, and I've always been quite resentful of the rich, and which is really a character flaw in me, but also a character flaw in a lot of rich people, in that I think they behave like pigs. So.
Gary, one of the funniest things I remember from you working out at the studio, at the comedy studio, I was not that familiar with your work there, and I got more familiar with it by seeing you there. You say, I'm from a very rare...
An unusual sect of Judaism.
I'm from a very unusual sect of Judaism. Poor.
Yes.
And the audience would laugh. It was really hilarious. Tell us about that, because you talked about wanting to play hockey as a kid and your parents discouraging you from it.
Yeah, it's interesting, because there's kind of a shame of belonging to a group of people who are known stereotypically for having something and then not having that thing. I mean, I don't know how to describe it. I mean, this is the thing, is that my family was obsessed with material things and talked and longed for wealth, and we were broke all the time, and my mother would make jokes about it. She would say, the next time I marry, I'll marry for love, the love of money, which was probably an old Mae West joker or something like that. And we would play the lottery, and we would dream, and my mother would take us for rides in neighborhoods where there were big homes and mansions, and we would long for this, and it warped our values, and for so long we had these adages like, it's just as easy to marry a rich woman, and it just I mean, luckily my father's values were very good, and I think it might be an immigrant thing where immigrants are so used to financial insecurity that they become workaholics. And become devoted to their jobs, expressing their success through material gains. And I think rather than guaranteeing happiness, I think it gets in the way of happiness. I've never been really rich, but there's been no amount of money where I've ever felt financially secure. I've been much poorer than I am now, and just as happy. It's always been when I've felt that I had a good relationship and good friends, and that I had a dream or something that I was working towards, that I was happy about and hopeful about.
Right. Well, this new tour that you're working on, I saw excerpts of it out in Beverly, and it's interesting that you're calling it the Born on Third Base Tour, hilariously chronicling your impoverished childhood on food stamps, free lunch, and welfare checks, while skewing the current Tale of Two City-esque wealth gap. So, how is that working for you? Do you find it cathartic? Do you find like you're making your points as well as getting laughs?
I get a lot of laughs. What I need to do now is put together the narrative that I had in the Great Depresh.
Mm-hmm.
Like with the Great Depresh, I was able to use the documentary footage to put together the narrative of how I went from breakdown and hospitalization to my recovery, and here I would like to sort of explain maybe what we're up against and perhaps what we can do individually, which is why I think I shared with you the charity that I'm dedicated to. It's called givewell.org. They have a list of charities that save the most lives. So they've figured out that there are certain charities that the percentage of your money goes to saving lives, like doesn't go to the overhead, doesn't go to paying the CEOs. And so the best money can go to malaria nets in Africa to keep kids from getting malaria and dying. Right. There's the Helen Keller International, which gives kids vitamin A supplements so that it cures blindness. So basically, I give most of my charity to these organizations because they do the most good with it.
That's great, Gary. And that givewell.org will be the Humor for Humanity charity for this particular show. Every show that we do, we try to have an organization that we pitch and promote and highlight. So if people want to give and have the means to, we try to encourage that, because this is a, quote, Humor for Humanity production. And you know about Humor for Humanity, I think that I started it about 10 years ago, and it's going to another level now because we can get on Zoom and we don't have to do live shows. We can do shows like this and interviews, and you can reach theoretically a lot more people than the live performances. And so givewell.org is our Humor for Humanity nonprofit that we're supporting this week. So that's a great one, Gary. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, I mean, I want to tell you how much of an example and someone I admire so much you are, because you obviously your comedy means so much to me, but your life work and your community outreach, and when you ran for lieutenant governor, and your work as an advocate and just more than just the comedian, you're a valuable member of the community, the comedy community, and the Commonwealth community, and I just, you're such a great role model for us younger and getting older people.
Well, thank you, Gary. And for the folks watching today, Gary was so generous when we did Gary did a fundraiser for me at the Burren in Davis Square, Somerville, that great Irish pub, the Burren. In the back room of the Burren, they have a wonderful stage and an entertainment venue. And we did a fundraiser when I ran for lieutenant governor. And Gary, I think you'll be proud to know, first time running for lieutenant governor, you did that benefit. Paula Poundstone did a fundraiser for me. We got 213,313 votes. First time running, 213,313 votes. Came in second place, Gary. Second place.
Extraordinary. That's
the good news. The bad news, Gary, two-person race. So we got we got the silver medal, is what I'm trying to say.
No, it's extraordinary, Jimmy. And I don't know if you're familiar with Ezra Klein at all, but he just had this woman on who she either has I think she has a book about the importance of running for something, for anything. Just these local races are so significant and so important.
Yeah, I just did a podcast last night with when I was talking about the importance of elected officials, or just I think one thing we have to do as a society is kind of chill on the demonization of like elected officials and people.
Yeah.
It's like, people are trying their best. We're in a pandemic. They're trying their best.
Yeah.
And I just am going to try to advocate for people and help the people I see in office who are trying to do the most good for the most people in the most logical way, and just try to promote peace and justice and fairness in our society. And I know you feel the same way. Every place that you're going to is at GaryGulman.com.
I think for the New England people, I'll be at, there's a Ridgefield, Connecticut date. There's a Foxwoods date, and I'm working on Providence, I think as well. So that will be really fun. I love being back out on the road. I mean, we take it for granted.
Me too, Gary. I mean, there's nothing like being back on stage. It takes a while. It's been taking a while to get back out there, but the audiences love it as well. The audience, I find, are very appreciative. Would you agree?
Yes. It's really been great. And I mean, I can't do the meet and greets anymore. I'm concerned about meeting so many people, but the feedback online has been more robust than usual. So it's really nice.
That's awesome. Well, Gary, thanks a million for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Again, we're honored to have you. You're a real powerful example, and not only in the comedy world, but in the mental health profession, in the mental health world, and people who are in recovery or suffering from depression or trying to overcome any kind of addiction. I mean, the show that's on HBO, The Great Depresh, I highly recommend it. There'll be a link to that in our show notes. There's a link to givewell.org in our show notes. That is the Humor for Humanity charity that we're supporting with this broadcast, and there'll be a link to GaryGulman.com. You can see him in Ridgefield, Connecticut. You can see him in Foxwoods, Connecticut. And you can see him hopefully up in Rhode Island soon, in Providence. And we will love you when you come back to Massachusetts. We'll probably see you at the Wilbur again. My wife and I have gone to the last 2 or 3 shows that you did at the Wilbur. My wife, Catherine, says hello. She loves you as well. It's so funny, Gary. I'll come home from work. I'll be out doing my sets, and I'll come home, and my wife is watching Gary on Netflix. She's watching Gary. She's watching Gary Gulman, or she's watching what's his name? John
Mulaney.
Who? Mulaney. John loves you. Loves John Mulaney. Loves Jim Gaffigan and
Terrific.
Sebastian Gulman, Gaffigan, and Mulaney. And I come home and I'm seeing her watching these every night, and I say, I can't believe it. We've been married 26 years. My wife is seeing other comics. I try to keep my head up, Gary. I try to be proud. I said, honey, I worked out a new bit. Come down and see me at the Comedy Studio.
Oh, man. Great taste. I love it.
She has great taste. She does. She's the greatest. And one of the reasons we hit it off, Gary, she has a wonderful sense of humor. And she laughs at stuff. We laugh all the time. And she's really, really funny. And we just love you. We think the world of you. And she goes, he's so adorable. He's so adorable. I said, what about me? What about me? I'm the Barney Rubble of comedy. What about me?
Oh, Jimmy. Jimmy, Barney Rubble is the Barney Rubble of comedy. He was a comedic actor. One of our best.
It's great to see you, Gary. Continued success. I love you too, man. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us today. And we'll put all the stuff in the notes. And continued success. Stay strong. Stay safe. Thank you so much.
All right. Say hi to Catherine.
I will.
Okay.
Bye-bye, yeah.